Good morning. We are getting together today to learn a Mishna from Pirkei Avot, from the ethics of our fathers, of our sages. And this is concluding the daily study of the Mishnah since the yahrzeit of our dear friend, Rabbi Israel ben Reb David Zichrono Livracha, our beloved Eric Samson. Today is the conclusion. Also, we're going to be studying the last Mishnah of chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot. The schedule will be continuing, I think, on a weekly basis for the next few weeks as well. And we're learning the final Mishnah of chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot. Why do we study Mishnah in general in memory of people? Where does that tradition come from? The letters of the word Mishnah are, of course, the same letters of the word neshama. But, as you may have heard previously, particularly for this neshama, the soul of the late Eric, these studies have a unique significance because they are the love, the enjoyment that Eric found and took in his weekly study of Pirkei Avot was something very real and powerful. So there's a particular connection to his soul, and I hope that our learning today will be a merit for his neshama. Now, Pirkei Avot, where does the name come from? The lessons or the teachings of our fathers. What's the idea of Pirkei Avot? What's unique about Pirkei Avot is that out of the 60 tractates of the Mishnah, if you would study the other 59 and follow everything you learned there, you would walk out a perfect Jew. In other words, you've observed every mitzvah to the T. And you would have to learn all of those tractates, not less and not more. That's the entirety of Jewish law, of the mitzvah, of the commandments, of the instructions of how a Jew must live. Pirkei Avot is separate to that. Pirkei Avot is what the Talmud refers to as the Milah de Chasadusa, the words of piety. Those who want to live a level higher, who want to live in a way that reflects a higher purpose of living, a level of holiness, a level of kindness, a level of giving to others that doesn't necessarily reflect the letter of the law. This is where someone wants to live beyond that. And that's essentially what all of Pirkei Avot is about. Now, what's interesting is that we think of Torah, we think of halacha, we think of law, we think of the things that a Jew has to do. And that's what God gave us at Mount Sinai. That's what God passed on through Moses to the people, the laws and how you have to live. But that's not true. Hashem didn't just give us the bare minimum. In that tradition that began at Mount Sinai as continuing up until this very day, Hashem also gave us, besides for the bare minimum, which is the entirety of halakha, the entirety of the Mishnah, other than Pirkei Avot, Hashem gave us a path to constantly aspire upwards, to beyond, to something else. This last Mishnah is, in a certain sense, a transition period. We're learning the Mishnah today in the memory of someone remarkable, someone that made an incredible difference in the world. But we're the ones that are learning it. Pirkei Avot is not just the incredible legacy that we get from all of our previous generations, up until the one immediately before us. Pirkei Avot is, okay, now what are we going to do about it? And this Mishnah represents that so beautifully. Because the author of the Mishnah that we're about to study is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was one of the first of the teachers of the Mishnah, of the Tanoim, of that era, which spanned over quite a long period and began technically even before the temple was destroyed. Many of the great sages were there, were living at the time. But this Mishnah is already the next generation. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And he was a fascinating person. There is actually a debate among the historians which Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel this Mishnah is referring to. But the consensus among the majority of the commentaries of the Mishnah and the historians is that it's the second one, who was the father of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the actual author of the Mishnah. And that would figure quite well in the succession that you see if you've been following the study of all the previous Mishnayot. It goes from one generation to the next generation to the next generation through all of chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot. Often, as you may have noticed, the partners, the pairs of scholars that would study together, and like Hillel and Shammai, probably the most famous, Shmaya and Avtalia, etc. Now we come to Rishon ben Gamliel, and he sort of closes off, he wraps up chapter 1, and chapter 2 begins with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi himself speaking, with the author of the Mishnah, now continuing that journey. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, he was a very prolific scholar and someone whose opinion is found hundreds of times in the Mishnayot. And although the Mishnah and Jewish law in general is full of debate, other than 3 cases, the halacha always follows Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So this just gives us a little bit of an understanding of what kind of a person he was and what kind of respect he got from his colleagues. So what are we doing now? We're learning a Mishnah. Now you would think, what's the appropriate way to remember someone's legacy? Is to build a building in their name, maybe to make a monument, to put up a big plaque, at least in the Shul with their name on it. Just a few people getting together to learn a Mishnah. Is that really the way to pay tribute to a great person? And the author of the Mishnah that we're about to learn is the one that says yes, because he is the one who writes very famously in the Jerusalem, the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Tractate Shkalim. He says that we don't build monuments to the righteous people. Why? Because their words are their legacies, their ideas, the difference that they make in the world. And so, please God, we should live up to the words of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and this should be a proper legacy. The words that we're about to study should be a proper legacy to the neshama of Israel conduct. Now, just as an introduction to our particular Mishnah, one of the most famous teachings in the entirety of Pirkei Avot, and I'm sure you've probably heard it before, is that the world stands on 3 things. Okay, now that is Mishnah 2. We're about to learn Mishnah 18, the last Mishnah of chapter 1. But Mishnah 2, the second Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, everybody knows it, is that the world stands on 3 things. And what are those 3 things? Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. The study of Torah, in other words, the inner truth of man, as we study Torah and take it into ourselves and we absorb it internally, Aveda, the worship of God, which is connecting above, and Gemilut Chasadim, acts of kindness, as those two inner truths of Torah and Aveda ripple outwards through acts of goodness and kindness and change the world around us for good. Those are the three things we always learn. But the Mishnah today teaches us something different at the end of Pirkei Avot. And what do we learn? Mishnah Yudches, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the son of Gamliel, would say, by three things is the world sustained: law, truth, and peace. As it is stated, truth and a judgment of peace you should administer at your city gates. Nobody's going to argue with this. Beautiful idea. Law, truth, and peace. You can't go wrong with that. That's fine. But, very obvious question to any student of Pirkei Avot is, how does that match up with what we learned in Mishnah 2, where Shimon the righteous said, also Shimon was one of the last surviving members of the Great Assembly. He said the world stands on three things: Torah, Aveda, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, the service of God, and deeds of kindness. How do we match these up? And the answer is essentially on one word in the Mishnah. Olam Omeid, the world stands on three things. And in other words, from its very creation and what sustains it. In other words, what is the foundation? Foundation is Torah, Aveda, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, worship of God, because that is where we are rooted. But how do we build on that? How does the society continue to function? Is through law, truth, and peace. Now, if you've been following the last few weeks, as we went through Pirkei Avot, you may have noticed an interesting pattern, not in every Mishnah, but it shows up along the way more than one or two times through chapter 1, and that is that the Mishnah frames a lot of the lessons, our lessons for life, in the context of a courtroom. Sometimes from the perspective of a judge, because of course we are making judgment calls from the moment we wake up till the moment we go to sleep. Right? Am I going to spend the time reading and catching up on work now, or am I going to spend it with my kids? It's a judgment I need to make. Two very important competing interests. Am I going to give the kids a bath, or am I going to go to Shul to help make a minyan? Which one is more important? And we have those kind of dilemmas all through the day. And so the Mishnah guides us, so to speak, as the ones, the judges in a courtroom doing that. And perhaps you could say that all of Torah reflects that. But here the Mishnah is giving us, I think, three ways of seeing the world. From the perspective of the judge, okay, so we're the ones in control making the call. From the perspective of the witnesses, in other words, we give witness, and the Torah is replete with verses that describe us as the witnesses to the world. In other words, we give witness to God's presence. We give witness to the eternal truth. We need to be the ones coming and offering truth into the world. And litigants, we are the ones that are being judged by God, by society around us, by the reality playing out in front of us. And here the Torah is saying that depending on the perspective that you're coming from, this needs to be your guiding light. And what is that? If you're a judge, it has to be law or justice. Law and justice needs to be number one. What is right? What is truthful? Commentaries on this Mishna, Pirkei Avot, say an interesting thing that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is the one who would say that he countered that famous comment where it was said that a court that would give a death penalty once in 70 years is a murderous court. Basically saying there should be no capital punishment. And he said, if you're not going to have any capital punishment, then murder will happen much more than once in 70 years. In other words, criminals will go free. But on the other extreme, and on truth, in other words, truth is the way that the one who speaks needs to be able to speak truth. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel teaches something very interesting about that as well, about the balance between truth and peace. Because he says, he points out, it's a very famous commentary that he gives on the story of Joseph and his brothers, right? Where the brothers fudged the truth, if you could say, when they told him that, no, our father told us to take care of us. Why did they do that? In order to keep the peace. And what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying is, yes, there is an element of that, but be careful. An error on the side of caution in remaining truthful. But ultimately, what is, of the three things that sustain the world, din, emes, and shalom, the final one, the one with which he, so to speak, concludes, is peace. And what does he bring as a proof for that? The pasuk from Zechariah, where it says, emes umishpat shalom, truth and a judgment of peace, you should administer at your city gate. Now, what does that mean? A judgment of peace. What he points out is that it ultimately is referring to a compromise. Now, no litigant is looking for a compromise. Every litigant looks at a compromise as a loss. I could have won this case outright, but I didn't. And they will think, only I could have got an outright win. Here the Mishna is telling us, no, that's not the way we should approach life. We should approach life to look for compromise, because ultimately Shalom will give us that more than anything. Chief Rabbi Lau brings an interesting commentary on this Mishnah, where he says that the Torah, when it describes the creation of the world, and God says, bring forth desha, tachia aretz desha, the world should give forth grass or vegetation so that people can live. The word desha is the letters daled shin aleph, din, shalom, and emet, justice, peace, and truth. And he says again, these are what the Torah is telling us are the critical factors necessary for the critical factors necessary for a healthy and a functioning society. So please God should be our implementation of that in our lives, should be a worthy tribute to the neshama of Azriel ben David. May his neshama have an aliyah. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week. And of course, Chodesh Tov, a great month, for the month of Adar, 2 months of Adar. We should increase in joy, increase in happiness, increase in Hashem's blessings.